All right. So thank you everyone for coming to this session. It's part of our OER workshop series that we're holding through our New Mexico OER Consortium. We're having them this whole spring, and this one is about finding and evaluating open materials for accessibility. And my name is Jennifer Jordan, and I am the OER librarian at UNM. And then also presenting with me is Jonathan Wheeler. And what is your very long title, John?
Hi, everyone. I'm John Wheeler. I am the data curation librarian at UNM Libraries and also our coordinator of graduate and faculty engagement. Yeah.
Thank you. So in this presentation, we're going to talk a little bit about varying abilities that our students might have when we're teaching in the classroom or presenting materials in workshops. We're also going to talk about like how to find OER, and then once you find it, how to look at it for accessibility, and then evaluate it for accessibility, and then also licensing and adapting open content and what you should consider when you're working on that material. So I have it first, the section on considering many abilities. This is just like some different disabilities that your students might have as you're teaching in the classroom. Um, Physical, sensory, cognitive, speech, auditory, visual. I remember the first time that I had a student who needed a sign language interpreter. That was like so eye-opening for me in terms of like what I needed to consider when I was creating materials for my classroom. And that experience kind of shaped the way that I think about making content for students. Our students also have, or could potentially have different visual disabilities, maybe low vision, color blindness, blindness. This image here is an example of something that would be impossible for a person with color blindness to read. It has like orange and green dots, and then the dots spell out the number 74. So it would be hard for someone with certain kinds of color blindness to be able to differentiate those colors and know what the image is trying to say. So we just want to think about that when we're creating content for our classes. Um, Also, when creating content, you can consider different cognitive disabilities that could be happening with your students, ADHD, autism, memory impairments, intellectual disabilities. Oops, I went too far. Um, Learning disabilities, seizure disorders. Sometimes your students will have documentation that will very clearly tell you how to accommodate them, and then sometimes not, because maybe they don't know what they need to do to get that officially documented. Um, but because of that, it's just helpful to think about these things as you're developing content so that it can be accessible to the widest range of students. Here's just some examples of practice for cognitive disorders. Um, Avoid blinking content, avoid complex sentences that are difficult to read or unusual words. And the nice thing about when you have OER, you can modify the content depending on the license to make it more understandable for your students. You can like lower the Lexile level for them if you're teaching an intro class. Also just basic web design can be super helpful for all students, like simple navigation and page layouts that are easy and understand to use. Lots of white space. Personally, I just like white space. If I see a chunk of material, like a chunk of text, and it's just probably because of this digital age, because I used to be able to read longer paragraphs. But now, especially on a digital page, it's hard to get through. And I'm gonna hand it over to John, who's going to talk about finding OER.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. And we can go ahead to the next slide. We have presented on this in earlier sessions, went into a little more detail about discovering OER and the resources that we can use to find OER, but especially within the context that Jennifer was just talking about for considering the breadth of the experiences and the abilities that our learners bring into our environments and into our classrooms. and also specifically how we may plan to use OER in different ways as we develop not just a single resource for maybe one lesson or one part of a broader syllabus, but ways that we can develop our entire syllabus or multiple syllabi in a way that is inclusive of our students' learning abilities and of our own actual needs for the different types of OER and educational resources that we might be creating. So, as an addition or an elaboration, if you will, on some of our previous discussion of ways that we can look for and think about discovering OER, certainly we can use search engines. There's a slide coming up where it talks about how you can modify Google's advanced search to hone in on open materials. But as with library databases, where sure you can search the global database of everything that's out there, but as we start working with educators and learners who are looking for very specialized have very specialized information needs, the needing an OER is a specialized information need, and there are special databases and resources that we can use to do that. And there's not a one size fits all resource out there that's going to be able to provide everything that you might need in every case as you're developing course content. So we invite you, as you explore OER, to think about it from different perspectives. For example, what types of documents are you interested in using? What content types are you interested in developing and incorporating into your class as open material? And there's just a few, it's noted here in the slide. The examples that were given here are not exhaustive, they're not complete, but they are recommended resources that, for example, if you are looking for a textbook, we have OpenStax, which produces some very fine, very highly regarded open educational textbooks across a variety of topics. There's also the Open Textbook Library. You may, depending on your course needs, be incorporating peer-reviewed articles and peer-reviewed content. And there's ways that you can find open content within the peer-reviewed scholarly literature. So, for example, we have the directory of open access journals, where every journal listed in that directory makes everything open access immediately, no cost. And in addition, most of our databases that we use, for example, Web of Science, ProQuest, other databases, including Google Scholar and search engines, you can also use filters that are going to help you filter down by license, by public availability. So there are ways that you can get those openly licensed, peer-reviewed articles to meet that need for your syllabus and your coursework that you're developing. This is also true for coming back to what Jennifer just said. Videos, multimedia allow learners to hit pause, they can hit stop, they can add transcriptions. It adds a lot of accessibility opportunities and affordances through multimedia. And there are databases that specialize in providing that open uh, multimedia content. Oasis, Wikimedia Commons. For images, we have Flickr, many other resources. So think about the types of content that you need in different places that you can find that as you develop your courseware. Um, and similarly, without going into it in as much detail, you can also search by subject area. So in the STEM fields, we have OpenStax, we have MIT OpenCourseWare. In arts and humanities, many resources are going to be available, for example, from JSTOR's open access platform, if you're looking for humanities, if you're looking for image content. Um, Oasis again, which will have a slide that shows a little bit more about that because it is a good resource for finding multiple content types across subject areas. Humanities Commons and again the Open Textbook Library is always going to be a resource for breadth of subject areas that are available. And next slide, Jennifer. Thank you. And these resources, these slides will be made available, and there will be a video, I think, of this. And we just want to point out some of the incredible resources that Jennifer and Sammy and others of our colleagues within the libraries and within the university and in the statewide consortium have created for helping you locate this information. So you don't have to go out and find, well, what are the other databases? If that was a non-exhaustive list before, what are other resources we can use to search for OER? I myself refer to the OER primer that's linked here, information about open access licensing, open pedagogy. Uh, these resources are invaluable, and I will particularly call out within the OER primer, there is a tab or a section on the many databases and specialized open educational discovery tools that you can use to search for and find that content. Next slide. Right, and a shout out to our colleague Sarah Kopelecki, who first developed our open access library guide. And just as a way of demonstrating how we can use some of these tools to find different types of content in different subject area, again, the OASIS meta finder that's provided by SUNY is an excellent example. If you just look at the screenshot here, we notice that you can filter by type. So maybe you're interested in a textbook, you can filter by that. Maybe you want a primary source, right? Some archival material. Those are listed as well. One of the reasons we like to highlight OASIS is because it also indexes institutional repositories, such as the digital repository that UNM provides. Um, where nearly all of the content, if not all of the content, is openly accessible, publicly accessible, and openly licensed. And that's a great place to find uh, images, primary source material, even if an article that a researcher has published, a peer-reviewed article, is not made publicly accessible or open access from the publisher, a lot of open access copies do end up in institutional repositories. And so, again, we like to highlight OASIS because it does index those repositories where there's a lot of almost open, not quite gray, but open access copies of the scholarly literature that may not be available, for example, from the directory of open access journals. Next slide, please. And again, just as a way of highlighting, there's a quite a bit of textbooks. When I look at OpenStax, for example, I know they have textbooks from across disciplines. We do tend to see statistics, astronomy, math, a lot of STEM areas, but just as a way of noting, the humanities are represented within these textbook providers, whether it's OpenStax or in this case, the Open Textbook Library, which again, we like to highlight and call out because of the feature that this particular database or service has for reviews. There's always the question of this material reviewed? Has it been vetted by the community? And Open Textbook Library is a case where they are particularly good at inviting reviews from experts who can give you that quality assurance of the material. So, and next slide. And yeah, and this I confess was lifted from the OER library guide, but I think it's a useful bit of information, useful resource. Although we have specialized databases, there are ways that we can search in Google and other databases using advanced search to, as is demonstrated here, filter by license. So if you're looking for Creative Commons licensed material, specific licenses, you can build that into your search so you know right away that everything that is returned from your search result is something you might potentially adapt into an open educational. So with that, I think, hand it back to Jennifer.
Right. Thank you so much, John. So then once you've gone out and you've found some materials that are open that you might want to integrate into your classes, you'll still want to evaluate them. Like you want to evaluate them for the content, right? To make sure that it's appropriate, like level for your students. But then you also want to like evaluate it for accessibility. So this section is just kind of going over some things that you can consider while you're trying to make your materials accessible for your students. And so one thing that you definitely can do is think about universal design principles because those can be helpful to just make the material good for any learner. So universal design, we talked about this in a different session, but it's just creating products that are usable by people with different disability or abilities, operating within the widest range of situations. So by including principles of universal design, you can think about how to engage your students in multiple ways. So, I mean, this is just like good practice. Like you can, make sure you're stating your goals, your learning outcomes, give them some note-taking support. Well, I used to like to just post everything that I went over in class on the in the LMS for students, just so they could refer back to it, and they always really appreciated that. But other ways you can do that is multiple ways of representation. So think about giving content to your students in multiple ways. Think about like, could you make this more interactive? Um, and then also multiple means of action and expression. So provide access to resources. Um, you can develop an agenda or learning plan and just follow it. And this is just like helpful for your teaching in general too. Like your students know where you're going, it'll help them to follow along. Um, and so that can help increase accessibility for lots of different students. Um, and so there's also like best practices that you can consider that are like in addition to universal design. So some best practices include thinking about like alt text for your images, create descriptive links for your students. And I have examples of this later on. Um, Heading styles, thinking about color contrast, for students with I mean, just really, I turn on the closed captioning when I'm watching just regular TV if it's hard for me to like understand the characters, or maybe they have a quiet voice. So, but captions are helpful. If you're looking at a video online, you want to make sure that it has closed captioning if you're going to share it with your students. Um, Other practices are clear, concise language, avoid jargon as much as you can. But that also goes back to universal design too. Like these things sort of like build on each other. Um, sorry, spell out your acronyms. Don't use too many. In education, we have so many acronyms. We don't need to subject our students to that. And then also think about like their assistive technology devices. There's also these web content accessibility guidelines. And so they're technical instructions that help to make websites more accessible for people with disabilities. They're internationally accepted guidelines that explain how to make websites, apps, and other digital content accessible to people with disabilities. So these are the four guiding principles of it, and you can just kind of like keep them in mind as you're um, creating material or adopting material for your students. So we can just go a little in depth into what this means. So poor. Um, you want the content to be perceivable through at least one sense for your students. Um, oh goodness, I'm going too far. Make sure it's operable, that it can navigate with assistive media, that it's understandable. Make sure that the material is readable and predictable in terms of like its structure and layout and design. I keep going forward. And then robust. So the students can access it in more than one way, which is super helpful. Also for all kinds of learners. And then as you're looking at the material that you might want to include in a classroom, think about like the technology your students might need to use in order to access that material. So assistive technology is a device or software or a product that can help people with disabilities perform tasks. Um, it can help people with communication, mobility, and work. Some examples of assistive technology that your students might be using. And it's not just students with disabilities. Like some students just really need to have the content read to them, so they might have like an app to narrate the material for them because it helps them comprehend. But so examples are things like screen readers, text-to-speech software, dictation software, alternate keyboards. They might need to use Siri or Amazon Echo to um like learn from the materials that you're providing them. And these are guidelines from the Accessibility Resource Center at UNM. And this was just from their website. And you'll see sort of like a pattern in these different suggestions for how to make materials accessible for students. Think about your layout and your organization. Offer them outlines for the material, let them practice with the material. Um, Videos, find, like I said, find videos that are already captioned, and then articles that are available in a text searchable format, which in a little bit I'm going to show you about like how to do that in Adobe. Um, Other tips for making the material accessible for your students. Um, this is for UNM. So at UNM, we have a software called Kaltura that can caption materials. Um, but other colleges and universities will probably have material like or a software like this. So if you don't know what your institution's captioning software is, you can just find out. You can like look at information technology website or check out, you can ask your disability resource center and they can help you. And then also make those images have descriptions of the images. So we call that alt text, but that's also jargon if this is new to you. You might be like, what is alt text, Jennifer? Um, so so those are just some things you can consider. And then now I'm going to get into like actual like practice of how to do this. So one thing you can do is make your PD, oopsies, I keep doing that. Make your PDF searchable. Um, so I'm going to show you how to do that. This is our version of Adobe that we have in our cloud. And this is an article, or no, this is actually a really long report. It's pretty cool. You could Google it. 101 creative ideas to use AI in education. But so I have it open in Adobe. Say there was some text on here that wasn't searchable. So that means that you couldn't highlight it because it's maybe like a JPEG format or some other reason why um, the text is not readable. So you want for the text to be readable by a screen reader. And so if you can't highlight the text, that means that screen reader won't be able to differentiate. So what you can do is right here, this is under all tools in this specific Adobe app. Like if you have Adobe, it might look different on your computer, but you can just go here and then enhance the scanned file. Um, and then click on this and then it'll make it OCR for you. So, and then once I click enhance, it's going to do that. But I think this is all fine. Like I think this specific PDF is fine. And it's doing it right down there at the bottom. And it's converting it for us. So that's just like one sort of like hands-on thing that you can do um, to make your PDFs more accessible. There's also other things that you could do. Um, like for example, this is from WebAIM, and I have this contrast checker. So I'm going to use some jargon here, and you might be like, what the heck? But I'm going to tell you what you do in this website is you enter in the hex codes and you see if they have enough contrast. But you might be wondering, Jennifer, what is a hex code? So I'm going to show you. So this is the WebAIM page. And so you can put the different hex values in here and it'll tell you like how like how do they work together? Could a person with like low vision in terms of like seeing color, could they differentiate like what is on the page? So this is an example of what's it called? Like a graphic that I made. Um, and so right here, like if I usually okay. This is going to let me change the color of this background. And so right now, it says that the color sort of code, the hex. I don't know the jargon totally. I just know how it works. So this is like the number of the color, right? And so if you wanted to see if this color was compatible with another, you would just copy and paste it and stick it in this web aim. Oopsies. Theoretically, this will work. I can try this again. There we go. I see it does work. Woohoo! And then I could take a different color, right? So I'm gonna go here and then I'm gonna look at this hex code and it's 6Fs. So let's see. Okay, woo! It's already there. Because it defaults to white. So the contrast ratio is 6.6 and it tells us that it passes. So if it didn't pass, it would tell you. So this is just like, I feel like what in the 2000s, like people had some pretty crazy websites, and there was like yellow font on a blue page and it hurt my eyes to see. And so the web pages that we see nowadays don't usually like look that terrible. So they're usually not that bad. But I mean, if you want to create a website and you want to make sure that like students with lower vision in terms of color will be able to read what you're entering into the website, you can use something like the web aim checker to do that. And it's super, and like I said, those numbers are called hex codes. Okay, here's another hands-on kind of thing, how to do alt text tagging. So I talked about this last semester with some faculty and they were like, what do you even mean? Well, like, what the heck are you talking about, Jennifer? What is an alt text? Like, what's a tag? And so that's when I realized I need to take it back a notch. And I need to just like start at the beginning with alt text tagging. So what I'm talking about when I say to alt text tag, what I mean is that if you have an image on a website or in a PowerPoint and you want to make it accessible for all your students, you're going to need to like go in and click on the image and then look at the description and make sure that it's accurately describing the image that you have. If the image is just for, I forget what the word is, but if it's just to make the page pretty and it doesn't help to add to the content, you don't need to describe that. There's also another box that you can click on. I'm going to show you in a second. So this is the PowerPoint. This is like meta right here. This is the PowerPoint that we're looking at. And all I have to do really is just like, can you see the box? Did it pop up? All I did was right click on this image and right here you can edit the alt text. And so this is the description of it. It says picture of a pixel filing video, audio, graphic, and text files. So this one is pretty accurate. Let's see. Let's see what this one is more decorative. That's the word. This is really kind of decorative. There's nothing. So we can just mark it as decorative. So that way the screen reader isn't going to get stuck on this image that's not even important. It's just like something to engage people who are looking at the material. So every like different kind of software is going to have a different way of like allowing you to make things accessible. I'm going to show you one more. So our LMS is called Canvas and lots of people have it, right? You might have it at your school. Canvas also has an accessibility checker and it does this little, it shows you this little green scale that it kind of rates like how accessible is your material. And so I got a passing grade. This is actually a class that I taught, but I only got a B. And then it tells me my presentation has images without description. So it actually like navigates to the images that I think this is taking a while to load. It's navigating to the images that don't have description. So this is also just like decorative. So I should mark it as decorative. Um, But not all my, I'm going to make a confession. Not all my files have always been wonderfully, perfectly accessible. Like I do the best that I can. Um, but I have a yellow. And so it says it's medium. Like I made this. It is a Word document. Um, but it's telling me I don't have headings. So it wants me to put a heading right here to show like where the title is. Um, but anyways, so that's also the checker in Canvas. So that's alt text tagging. And then another thing that you can consider with regard to making your material accessible is to create meaningful hyperlinks. And so the reason why this is important is because it helps your students with screen readers. So at the top, there's examples of hyperlinks that need a little bit of help. And so um, a good hyperlink will integrate well with assistive technology. It'll help users navigate the page. It's also a good hyperlink will tell the student where the link is going to take them. And so click here is kind of vague. Um, and then it also helps to make the page easier to read because like with this long URL, um, the screen reader is going to read this whole dang thing off. And wouldn't that be annoying to listen to the screen reader list the whole URL? So you don't want it to do that. So instead, you can have a good hyperlink that tells you the title, tells the user where the link is going to take them. You can let the link be the title of the content itself. So that's what we mean when we say create meaningful hyperlinks. So that's another way you can um, modify material that you're creating for your students to make sure that they can navigate through it pretty seamlessly. And then headings. So I think this is the last thing that I'm going to go over is the importance of headings. And so headings are super important. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, that's okay. I'm going to show you. But so headings are they provide a structural hierarchy for your content. Um, what they do, like what's great about them is that they allow your students to skim the page. You know how when you're opening up a scholarly article and you just want to skim different sections first, um, a student who has a screen reader will be able to do that. Just like focus, they can just look at all of the headings first to see like how the article is built up. And they can just kind of like navigate from section to section with the screen reader if the headings are properly marked. Um, so it helps people find the information that they need. So if you think about it, your students who can see are able to do that visually because they can see the importance based on like the size of the font, right? And the patterns that it creates. But our students with the screen readers don't have that ability. So you want to make it like a level playing field for them, make it so that they can also skim the content. So a way that you can do that is I'll just show you. This is an equity rubric that I was looking at earlier. And so when we're talking about headings, like they are like right here, right? This is heading 1. So the screen reader will tell you this is like the title, right? So the rest of the text is normal. Let's see if this has a heading. Ooh, this has a heading too. So visually, your students can read a table and know that like the what, the who, the why is like important. It's telling us like sort of like the subsection of the table. So visually students can do that, but then also through like inserting headings, you can show your students like how important the material is based on that hierarchy by assigning headings to it. So I hope that makes sense. I hope I'm probably throwing too much at people right now, but I think that is all I had in terms of like hands-on how to make things more accessible. This is not an exhaustive list. I'm going to hand it over to John.
Great. Thank you, Jennifer. And I'm going to kind of take us out a little bit with some further reflections on licensing and adapting open content. This is another area where we have had some previous sessions. on open licensing schemas, in particular Creative Commons. It's one we had a dedicated workshop on last week or 2 weeks ago. We had a session this week for Open Education Week on it that included a lot of information about licensing. So without rehashing a lot of that, there's a few aspects of that licensing related to modifications and adaptations that we may make to OER in order to improve the accessibility that also need consideration when we're using content and when we license content. So next slide. Because not all Creative Commons licensed material can be modified, and we're going to look at some of the different qualifiers of these licenses. But in particular, if you are using content, if you're working with content where you see it's got a Creative Commons license and there's this ND um, tag or this ND qualifier, that means no derivatives, which means the content needs to be shared out or copied as is, as you receive it. Next slide. And so just as coming to kind of an overview of some of the concepts and topics that we've discussed relative to Creative Commons licensing, there is a CC just plain Creative Commons. You may see CC0, which is equivalent to public domain, and that's the most open of the Creative Commons licenses. But a lot of times we're starting from what we call a CC BY, where we're requiring attribution, and a CC BY is sort of the bottom level, if you will, second most open type of license, where we're allowing people to use content. We've created content. If you see a CC BY license on the content that you want to adapt, that means that there are very few restrictions or limitations on what can then be done with your adapted or your modified version of that source material. And further limitations that we can introduce in general include this SA, which is share alike, where in addition to attribution, we're uh, requiring other people who may use or modify our content, or when we see this license and source material and we're using it, if you see share alike, that means the content, any modifications have to be made available using the same license. Similarly, you may see non-commercial requirements, non-commercial limitations where content can be modified. You can copy it, you can distribute it, but it can't be used for commercial purposes. And we can see these in combination as well, where not only is it non-commercial, but it has to be any modification to the source material, to the source content has to be shared with the same license. Next slide. Thank you. And the reason we go into this is because the way we start to combine these limiters or these qualifiers within a Creative Commons schema can actually affect our ability to, if depending on how the content that we're sourcing is licensed, it can affect our ability to use it and to put a different license on it. And likewise, there's this downstream effect where people who access our content that we create or our modifications, our adaptations of other people's content, there's this kind of cascading effect of how the licenses start to affect each other. And so, for example, if there's a license that is you have to provide attribution, but you can't have a non-commercial use, we could then go on and adapt that content and license it with a share alike license, and we can add that additional restriction. But if we are using content that is requires attribution and is limited to non-commercial uses and comes with a share alike license, we can't then remove that share alike aspect and just relicense our modified content of the source material with by removing that share alike. So there are I guess collisions are one way to think about it, that we have to consider how these licenses interact. And next slide. And just as as kind of an overview, the way of thinking this is that, we do need to consider what allowable according to the license of the source material that we may be using or adapting in our classes or in our open educational resources. Because, as is noted here, open licenses are generally permissive, but they're not all equally permissive. And I won't step through this in detail, but we have kind of a hierarchy here of this graphic. And this is taken also from the OER library guide that we have a link to um, in this presentation. But the idea that we have a continuum from highly open to all the way down to a complete all rights reserved type of copyright. And you see as we get down in this hierarchy, this continuum down to less, I should say, more restrictive, more limitations. We see that the last thing that comes in that limits our ability to adapt and to share things um, or recreate things is the introduction of those no derivative um, qualifiers. And the question here that Jennifer and I have talked about this a few times this week, we've done some homework on this. We would like to give you a firm yes or no answer, but do modifications for accessibility fall under fair use, where you could make a derivative, a derived copy of something if all you did was add alt text to it, or if you added an OCR layer and then you redistributed it, would that count as a derivative? It depends. Could fall under fair use in in some circumstances, and could also uh, be outside of fair use. So we encourage everyone. The advice we got as we were looking at this and reaching out to other people was contact the creator, contact the author when in doubt if your modification for accessibility actually would be considered a derivative. And next slide. And so, yeah, this is something that after presenting on this a couple of weeks ago when we talked about Creative Commons in general, just wanted to come back and redefine this, especially in the context of reflecting on how you share or license your own open educational resources can very much depend on the licenses of the source material you use. And so I won't read through these, but the real limiting factors are not that by aspect where all you're requesting is attribution, but these additional limiters related to what kind of licenses can the material that you create have based on the source material, whether derivatives are allowed, and whether commercial use are allowed. These are the main limiting factors that we should consider when we want to repurpose or modify or use someone else's openly licensed content, and how are we going to distribute that, or how are we going to plan to share that down the road?
So does anybody have questions though about what we're talking about? Are there any questions in the chat? Questions? That feels better on this slide, asking if there's questions.
And Jennifer, some questions came up in the chat that I tried to answer while you were presenting, but
Okay.
I would certainly welcome any additional insights you have.
When using alt text, is it listed as a caption for everyone or just someone who needs it, clicks on the message and reads the alt text? I haven't been able to see the alt text on images. I do think there's a difference between like captioning and images, and sometimes you can have like a caption when you hover on an image that might show up, but the alt text is different from that. But anybody else questions? That's a good question. We threw a lot at you. And then also this last slide just says, please evaluate this session. On Monday, you will receive a survey and we would love to hear what you think. Is there anything you all wish I would have we went over?
Well, I have a question. I would like to know a little bit more about the color. I know
Yeah.
that John sent me some information through the chat, but I would like to know if it is a special specification in color for visually impaired people.
Yeah, definitely. You just want to make sure that the color contrast is what are the okay, so Marcy said what are the best colors for headlines or okay. Um, so yeah, you just want to make sure like if the colors are layered over each other, that the person looking at the material will be able to like differentiate like the letters from the background. And so if there's more of a color contrast, the student will be able to read that material. So then in that website, the WebAIM site, you can enter in like the hex numbers and it'll tell you like how high of a contrast there is between the two colors. Did that?
And for example, it is some colors that are better. For example, I've read in internet that it's better use like grays or white and black instead of, shiny colors. But I'm not sure if it is possible to use more color. Because in this moment, I'm designing to all the things very simple, but I would like to add color.
Yeah. There's also like graphic design websites that can help you and they'll have templates. This is what I did because like nowadays in this whole with the publishing industry, it's like you have to figure out how to make your own stuff accessible like
Mhm.
for the publishers, right? So what I've done, and this is just like a little hack, is like I'll go into the templates of this site, and this site automatically creates templates that are going to be accessible for people. So you could just like take the hex codes from a design that they've created and apply that to your work, and then you'll know that that the color contrast will be good. So
Okay.
that's like a little hack.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm glad Jennifer used that word template. I was trying to think of that earlier when, tools like InDesign and Photoshop, where they have color palettes, sometimes they'll have prepackaged palettes that are high contrast, where as long as you use colors from that particular palette set, that contrast will be there. And certainly one of the things I learned in putting this together was looking at the WebAIM resource and how, depending on how much contrast you need, you really want to, where Jennifer showed an example where the initial contrast was like higher than 8, right? And then we switched colors and the contrast went down to something like 6. Uh, your use case is going to determine what level of contrast you need for different orders.
Okay, thank you.
And so Marcy said for OER creators for this project grant, will the media specialists be able to make those accommodations? That is a great question. Actually, I think the way that we're going to do it is you will create an image log and you will enter in the description of the images, but then they will do the technical part of actually putting that into Pressbooks for you. So we'd still like you to describe it for us, but then they can enter it in. But does anybody have other questions? You're welcome. All right. Well, thank you for coming. I think I might wrap it up. Yeah. Thank you for being here on a Friday to learn about accessibility. That's amazing. You guys rock.
Thanks, everyone.
Join us soon next time and check out Tech Days. Thank you.